Well, I wanted to do a fourth and probably final program on Jews and Christians, a dialectical relationship. I started discussing the passage in Romans 11 where Paul says that his ministry has the intent of arousing jealousy among his people, the Jews, when they see the Christians, as I put it, living as a messianic people. And I've said that we Christians have a long way to go in showing signs of being messianic. For example, turning swords into plowshares and things, and living in peace and things like that. And I also mentioned that in the Jewish view, the attempt by God to make a whole creation uh, go from chaos to order apparently failed. And God chose one man after the Noah second attempt also failed. God chose Avram or Abraham to sort of focus on just one people and instill in them his laws and wisdom, and what other people has laws like we have, and a God so near to us every time we invoke him in Deuteronomy 4, if I recall correctly. And then I've spoken a little bit about about Jesus Christ. But today I want to sort of try to wrap it up. And I wanted to begin by speaking about the notion of myth. I see I have a subscriber or two. So some people, enjoy or like or are interested in these videos, which means that I may not have to say that a myth doesn't mean a false uh, story exactly, but a myth is a story, sometimes highly invented or composed, that expresses fundamental truths, at least about what the myth makers and myth believers want to believe about themselves and their history. So that in Judaism, probably the primal myth is the Exodus from Egypt, commemorated every Passover. God freed us when we were slaves. He freed us, led by Moses, to whom he had revealed his name and gave these very wise laws, from which we strayed during the time of the judges and the former prophets. And then there's a halftime, like in a football game, where the coach tells the losing team how it must regroup and reaffirm its commitment to winning. And what you have in the Babylonian exile is the forging of Judaism. Um, the forging of Judaism as a monotheistic and religion that takes fundamental precepts very seriously, such as the Sabbath, circumcision, and especially the laws of kashrut or the kosher laws, which are basically a separating mechanism to make Jews separate from pagans who could corrupt the purity of the Jewish faith. And we know that Solomon, who was very wise, when he became rich and had 1,000 women, many of these foreign women, turned his heart away from the Lord who had appeared to him twice, etc., in 1 Kings 11. And so until yesterday, until now, Jews ideally are going to die with the Shema, the Hear, O Israel prayer on their lips. I think Rabbi Akiva did that when he was martyred. But so those are Jewish myths that would have historical kernels. Certainly, they went to exile in Babylon. Certainly, they were preached to in Babylon, and certainly their myth has a lot to do with being led out of Egypt and going to Mount Sinai, and there making a covenant with God in chapter 19 of the book of Exodus, where they will be Yahweh's personal possession, segula, uh, among among all the peoples, and Israel will be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Interesting, a goy kadosh, goy normally referring to the pagans, but sometimes to Israel. And so you have this conception of the Jewish conception of being the uniquely chosen people. I taught at a Catholic seminary where a rabbi who was my friend uh, taught a course called the 13 Principles of Maimonides. How there is no one like God, so the notion of God incarnate or even a second power in heaven is anathema to Jews. And he said that, if Chinese or Cubans or some other people said we are the chosen people would chuckle. But if a Jew says it, it has a lot more credibility. And so we've talked about that. And last time I think I said that it seems that instead of the Christians making the Jews jealous, it's the Jews with their success and their discipline and their love for study and their ethical uh, rules have made the Christians jealous and made them, or not made them, but resulted in Christian persecution of Jews. So if we wanted to study a little bit what is Judaism about, one of the things we would say is that it is about God as the other, which is one of the meanings, or the main meaning perhaps, of kadosh or holy, separated out. God as the other. I think Martin Buber wrote about that. So God is not us, and he can't be represented by human things like statues or idols or icons or anything like that. It's centered on the Torah as a book of words, which is the name of the book of Deuteronomy, which is like the second Torah, Devarim. And so the Jewish myth is a great myth, but I think it works primarily for Jews and for Christians who study Judaism, as the church, the Catholic Church exhorts us. I meant to grab a hold of it, and I doubt that I could find it very easily, and I'm not going to try to fumble around and take up time. But a great document from the year 2000 or 2001 in the English translation, I think the original is the French. I've had, all those translations, including the Italian, which I gave away. The Jewish people and their sacred scriptures in the Christian Bible. And it says that the Jewish understanding of the Messiah is a valid and possible one, which Christians hold a much different version of regarding Jesus Christ. But that when Christ returns, he will have signs of this Messiah that will be recognized by the Jews, or something like that. I forget. But the gist of it is that the church recognizes that there's tremendous wisdom that Christians can learn from in Jewish studies of the Bible and of religious things of concern to them in the Talmud or other literature, and that their position is viable, which is quite different from people that I hear saying, how can Jews not believe in Christ when the prophets so clearly predicted him, etc. And I spoke last time about the Nevi'im having to be introduced to the Christian prophets because they're like strangers to themselves. And I don't want to repeat that. So that you have this religion that works for Jews, and that Christians have this dialectical or sort of rivalry with. And if we understand that in a good sense, we can all be enriched. I am reading the Jewish annotated New Testament with Amy Jill Levine, whom I know and like and have been friendly with at these Bible meetings. She actually served as New Testament book editor for the Catholic Biblical Quarterly, in case people don't know these things. And Mark Z. Bretler, who did a lot of work on the Jewish study Bible, also is involved in this Jewish New Testament very much. And it's very impressive. I mean, as a New Testament scholar myself, I can agree with everything they are saying in their essays. It just reflects very fairly and accurately and thoroughly what good scholars say about the New Testament. So this is all gold. If we can, and this is a Jewish contribution, if we can be rational and study. All the philosophers agree on what's the good life, a simple, frugal life, sharing, not being attached, idolatralistically, in an idolatrous fashion to greed and money. Colossians says greed is a form of idolatry. Love of money is the root of all evil. We could have tremendous understanding among all the religions. We're about to celebrate the week of Christian unity now in January. But beyond Christian unity, unity among all people of goodwill, like Pope John the 23rd would refer to. So that's a great Jewish contribution, but again, there is a difference between being Jewish and not Jewish, and we can live together very, very well. But I want to talk now about the Christian myth, which is very interesting. And of course, the Christian myth is that after a long period of messianic expectation, a prophet arose named John the Baptizer, announcing that the axe was laid to the root, judgment would commence. And one of the people that went to be baptized by him was Jesus of Nazareth, who probably was a disciple of John the Baptist, and that the Spirit came into Jesus, that Jesus had a revelation, that eventually Christians would come to understand, especially after the resurrection, when they experienced Jesus as Lord and Christ, Christ would be Messiah, but already in Greek, Christos, to indicate that the Christian Hellenistic notion of Messiah has changed from what the Jewish notion of Messiah was or may still be, with an earthly kingdom. So Christ is the Christian version, even in a different language and in a different thought world, kind of what Christ as Messiah means. So Paul, for example, I think experienced Jesus as Lord and Christ, and reasons backwards, as I said last time, and understands the scriptures in a new way. And so I do think that the resurrection is fundamental. As a Christian, as the Christian believe that Christ, when he rose from the dead, when God raised him from the dead, became Lord, or was designated or defined as Son of God in power, at the beginning of the letter to the Romans says. N.T. Wright has 2 volumes on Paul, which I read very carefully. And this is the horizon verb in Greek, designated or discerned, defined as the Son of God in power according to the Spirit of holiness by his resurrection from the dead, or by virtue of, or from. This ek preposition can be translated probably in different ways. So that if we were to follow a gospel like the Gospel of Matthew, it makes the point, I think, artificially, that because it need not have been made, that Jesus sent out his disciples to the lost sheep of the house of Israel only, not to Samaritans or Gentiles, so that the rejection by Israel could be more manifest and even culpable, so that at the end of Matthew, go out to all the nations and make disciples of them and baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So that Christianity sort of breaks out from the inclusivity that Jesus manifested with these meals with sinners. We're reading that these days in the Mass. And even though he had very little, if any, contact with pagans, maybe healing at a distance, the centurion's son, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, say but the word, and my servant shall be healed. Jesus doesn't need to go to the house and defile himself, maybe, even though he's depicted, at least in Mark, which I am more and more aware of how much composition there is there, he's depicted as touching lepers and being touched by menstruating women, etc. So that, but nevertheless, he gets into these conflicts with the Pharisees because the Pharisees are set upon separation. The Perushim, this name for Pharisee, probably means the separated ones. And Jesus is being inclusive. He's gathering these lost sheep, just like the program in Ezekiel 34 says. He will make turn the stray. There's more joy in heaven over one lost sheep found than over 99 just. Or I've come as a physician to bind, as described in Ezekiel 34. So you have this, and I think you have this already in Isaiah, a centripetal movement where to be faithful to God, you turn inward and separate from pagans, which is very valid and understandable. And we practice it ourselves. Few of us let anybody into our house. We check out people, the most devout Christian and even in religious orders, although they don't do this such a good job sometimes, they have to check out who they admit or not admit. Jesus apparently even invited himself to the house of a arch publican, Zacchaeus, in Luke, 18 or so, 19. Jesus was known as being inclusive. And the Pharisees, who would later uh, be represented by the rabbis, represent the opposite direction. Just like in Isaiah, you have a centrifugal movement. Go out to the farthest islands. Chapter 66, I will even take for priests and Levites, which my Professor Blenkingsop pointed out, a nervous editor inserted verse 20 in Isaiah 66. No. They'll be transporters of the Jews who come back, but there's no priests or Levites from the pagans. But my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. The beginning of 3rd Isaiah 56. So even in Judaism, you had this tension between turning inwards to be pure and faithful, or turning outwards because the experience of Israel in the exile was so enormous that it could not have value only for Jews, but would be a light to the nations, to the Goyim, as Isaiah 49 itself talks about. And I think the Jews do fulfill that light to the nations, but for Christians, obviously, in a very different way than Jesus. Jesus, especially for me and for Catholics in the universal church, according to the whole Catholicos church, Catholica, every nation, tribe, etc., just like the Son of Man is described as doing in Daniel 7, he was given Shaltan or exousia, honor and kingdom, and all the peoples and nations and tongues serve him. The end of Zechariah has universalistic passages where they will all come, except for Egypt, to celebrate the Feast of Booths, etc. I heard a great rabbi at Florida Atlantic University, they call him Yitz Greenberg. He's famous for writing the Jewish festivals and other books. He has a book called, I think, Between Heaven and Earth, which I have and I've read. I don't remember everything these days. And he does say that Christianity is not polytheistic. The Trinity is not a polytheistic idea. I have met with Jewish Latin American women talking about, I guess, when the Passion of the Christ movie came out. But then they kept me a long time asking me about the Trinity, maybe the incarnation of Christ. Much more curious, perhaps, than in many, many Christians. Most of these Jewish Christian encounters were, the attendance was by Jews. Even in churches, more Jews came than Catholics or Christians. There is this desire for knowledge and to know. Not universal. I'm disappointed when I see that you can't just generalize about a whole people, but in general, you're going to have a certain guarantee of intelligence and care. I inherited this condo from a Jewish couple, very old, who would visit it every year or occupied it every year, and the care of having almost nothing at all broken in the least is remarkable. And so I admire all these things. So the Christian myth is that God decided not just to bear his arm in the Exodus or to instill fear in the opposing armies or send prophets like Hosea, who lived in their own life the drama of Israel's infidelity by marrying a woman of prostitution, etc., but that he actually decided to tent among us. Not symbolically, as in the tent of meeting in the Exodus, but to actually tent or put his tent among us, which is what is said in the prologue of the fourth gospel, Gospel of John. The word, this davar Adonai, this word of the Lord, that is what he sends to the earth or to the prophets, closely related to his name, Hashem, which is still an expression for God, a circumlocution to not pronounce the holy name. This name is what dwells in the temple, not God himself, or the glory, the kavod of God. In Ezekiel, the priestly school is the glory that fills the tent of meeting. So God has these lieutenants, placeholders that he kind of intermediaries. Just like Moses. We don't want to hear you directly, God. I think in Deuteronomy 4, speak through Moses. And so Moses is the valid intermediary. The great Dominican Père Boimard, Marie-Émile Boimard, whom I met in Jerusalem, may he rest in peace, great Bible scholar, some strange ideas. He wrote a book, basically, I think it's called Moses or Jesus as the topic in the Gospel of John. And I spoke about chapter 9 of John last time, where the Jews say to Jesus, we know God spoke to Moses 1,250 years ago. They don't add that date, long time ago. But we don't know. That's the Jewish dilemma, if you will. Moses prohibited believing in false prophets, magicians, rebellious sons. And all those things could be categories into which a good Jew, in all good faith, could put Jesus. So what Jesus inaugurates, if you read Acts of the Apostles, is a community with one heart, gathered together. They still go to the temple. They pray, they break bread. There's no one lacking anything. Those who have properties put them at the feet of the authorities, the apostles. I'm reading Burton Mack. He doesn't believe any of this. But it is an idealized picture of the primitive church, and it does raise the issue of how Jewish separation was a problem in the church. In other words, there were, according to Acts, Pharisees who had become Christians who insisted that to become a member of this new messianic community, you needed to be circumcised and observe the whole law of Moses. And I've been reading a lot of people that talk about the James Party and other diverse situations in early Christianity where, in fact, it's not as neat as even Acts of the Apostles presents, much less as neat as some church histories would present. But the fact of the matter is that both in Judaism and Christianity, the dissidents, even prophets in the Old Testament, have to sort of disappear. They are too destabilizing. You have to tame them and make them submit to the Torah. The time of prophets is over, and now we have basically an unchanged Jing Torah. There are obscure points. Maybe Elijah, when he returns, will explain them, but not Jesus saying, Moses said, but I say. It's a great, it's a book by by Jacob Neusner. A rabbi talks to Jesus, which I haven't and have read. So this is a dialectical relationship. And so yes, we have in Christianity you have had saints like Saint Francis who did practice this poverty and humility, and many other saints which we are very, very proud of and which I have studied a great deal, as I am fascinated with Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls monks, and the kind of fervor that they had, and many other instances. I'm reading Anne Frank's diary at night, and I think in the presence of a very pure soul, as Simone Weil, or Simone Weil, if you want to pronounce it that way, was. She was called by Camus the only pure spirit of our time. She was from a Jewish family that basically said not a word about Judaism. And she says Jesus appeared to her. And whether she was baptized or not at the very end is debatable. But this is a product of Judaism, as was Jesus. Incredibly ethic of love, just like Hannah Arendt talks about the banality of evil and all these things. I'm a Freudian myself, as far as the science of psychology. Psychoanalysis more than Jung. Although a Dominican, Boniface Ramsey, said, don't forget your Jung. But I've got more into Freud back in the day, and I still believe in the unconscious as a place where a lot of things take place with effects that rise above the conscious. I have a deep admiration, therefore, for Judaism. And I think the dialectical relationship should help us, should help Christians try to make the Jews jealous in a good way rather than be jealous of the Jews in a bad way, expropriating their properties and expelling them from all the nations, including the famous one in Spain, 1492. I've read, I guess, Jacob Marcus, the Jew in the Middle Ages, when he talks about how the Jews bribed Portugal to give them asylum. And Portugal reneged on the deal, kept the money. That doesn't make Jews jealous of Christians. it really does not. And so the dialectical relationship continues. But certainly when you get to the myth symbolology, and I don't like this thing too much here. I'm not even going to use it really. Instead of, a long time ago, they parted the Red Sea and Moses broke the tablets and all this stuff. Very effective, especially for Jews, and Christians still read it. And on Easter Vigil, we read all these readings, including the Song of Moses, Exodus 15. In Christianity, you have a real historical man who had these festive meals, who healed, known as a healer, known as compassion, known as a country bumpkin in a way that had these marvelous parables that stuck. However much all this is redacted by evangelists and all this stuff. Burton Mack thinks the guy did nothing. Jesus had a little philosophical school and maybe whispered a few little things here and there, and then these other people all made it all up, and they were greater than Jesus. That's ridiculous. He must have, as Josephus says, caused such an impression that they still loved him much later on. So that you have a real life and then you have a real passion. However much it's all, projected from the Old Testament or Old Testament prophecies or passages or Psalms are applied to the Passion of Jesus, he was crucified. The most cynical, if you want, or skeptical Bible scholar like Rudolf Bultmann, some of whose direct disciples I have had as professors at Harvard, Helmut Kester and Dieter Georgi, and maybe others, datum firmum, you can take to the bank that he was crucified. And probably that the titulus on the cross was King of the Jews, false messianic pretender, vying to be king, illegal, capital treason penalty under the Lex Juliae Majestatis or some other Roman law. No doubt about that he suffered, and no doubt about that he didn't renege. He didn't say, "Oh, okay, I did it, or I'm guilty, or something." Wasn't the only one. Another Jesus ben Hananiah. People that know these stories know that he was scourged to the point of being in rags, says Josephus, and he still said, "Woe to Jerusalem," from the four winds, etc. Jeremiah 7. So monopolies are hard to pinpoint. I talked about Morton Smith, whether the Jews were the only people that self-criticized themselves in canonical writings. But nevertheless, Jesus was a unique historical individual and uniquely, suffered this passion. Not he was one of thousands that were crucified, but his disciples looked at it very differently, and especially when they experienced with great conviction that he had risen from the dead and been constituted Lord and Messiah. I repeat, a famous rabbi, or a rabbi years ago, famously said, "My studies show Jesus rose from the dead, but he was not the Messiah." Why? Because nothing has changed. I believe some things have changed, but it took 1965 for the church in Nostra Aetate to issue a declaration saying the Jews are not to blame for the death of Jesus. That's a bit late, but a little progress. So that I believe that we are in this dialectical and enriching relationship. I see some of my friends in Facebook, especially Italians, that they almost, I think they celebrate Shabbat like Jews, which I think is wonderful. And we do believe in the uniqueness of Jesus. We believe that he was raised from the dead to become Lord and Messiah of a kingdom not of this world, or empty right insists that the world will be transformed and we will have bodies and we will reign with Jesus. I'm not too sure about that. But nevertheless, the Jew is going to say deeds, not words. Just like the Gospel of Matthew says, deeds, not words. Blabbing is easy. Checking off a list of dogmas you believe in, that's easy as hell. Living a messianic life, that's the hard part. The last judgment is not, did you check the list off right, but I was hungry, you gave me to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. I was naked, you clothed me. I was an immigrant and you didn't send me back. And most Christians today would probably just join the masses, whoever they were, if there were masses. I don't think there were. Few people, maybe, I don't know, maybe temple employees, that was a big factor. They would crucify Jesus today again. Because, even his being Jewish would be a bad thing, just like the Nazis didn't like that too much. We have anti-Semites all the time now. Those are morons. I mean, if you can be a Christian and an anti-Semite, you are certainly not following John Paul II, Saint John Paul II. The Jews are our elder brothers. So that I wax prolific on this topic because it comes out that way. But certainly Jesus we believe in and believe, even if it's absurd. There's a famous Latin phrase, credo quia absurdum. I believe because it's absurd, a little like Kierkegaard. It's such an other thing. It's so different from human stuff. Napoleon supposedly said, I know man, Jesus was not a man. So that the otherness that the Jew insists upon for God, a Christian can say Jesus was that other man, unlike. And we believe God was in him and incarnated himself in him, that he was the word or the expression of God or the glory of God, the manifestation of God, the Shekinah, if you will. But we have to do a lot to make that believable. May they be one so that the world may believe. Tell that to the culture warriors. They may say, I'm a culture warrior. I'm not a culture warrior. I think if we agree on facts and philosophy, it doesn't matter if you're a Hindu or whatever you are. But unity comes with common ground of facts, not lying, or finding the pressure points to get people angry so that you can get more power. This guy denying Sandy Hook made millions of dollars. That to me is proof of the absurd. This is the diabolical version of I believe because it's absurd. They don't even think about that. They just believe it. They don't think it is absurd. They think it's true. There was no Sandy Hook. These were actors. But Christians and believe in the absurdity of something that they have faith in the good sense. And with that, I will finish this.